doing a similar thing. And so, for example, when the model sees the word it, then it knows which word it should look back. And then whether it's an object or a human living thing, then the model is able to translate that it correctly. And all the transformer models have been trained as language models, which means that they have been trained on a larger amount of raw text in self-supervised fashion. Self-supervised training is just a type of learning where the output is automatically computed. So we don't have to label this data manually. And this type of model develop a statistical understanding of the language, but it's not very useful for practical tasks. So it is like, you can imagine that the model learns the grammar and the spellings of a language, but it still does not how to write sentences. So after this, we use supervised learning to fine-tune a model with annotated data and also task-specific data. And we can do this supervised training in two ways. The first one is called masked language modeling, where the model predicts a masked word based on all the other words in a sentence. For example, in this picture, the masked word is here, and the model is trying to predict the name based on is Sullivan. And the second type of supervised training is causal language modeling, where the model predicts the next word in the sentence based on all the previous words. For example, you see in this picture, at first the model sees only the first word, and it tries to predict the next word, name. And then next time the model sees two words, and the name, and it tries to predict the next word, if. And then so on and so forth, the model is able to generate the whole sentences. And and we compiled our own data sets, which contains about 62,000 tweet and English sentences. And to fine-tune the model, we have to do some pre-processing to these data sets, such as tokenization and encoding, because in the view of models, it can only understand numbers. So we have to break the sentence down into words and turn the words into numbers. And yeah, and then once we tokenize the data set, we pick the model to fine tune with. And the model we picked is the BART transformer model. Yeah, it's just a particular type of the transformer model, and there are also thousands of different architectures out there. Right, and then after we fine-tune the model, we used a metric called the BLUE score to evaluate the translation quality. So it basically computes the similarity between candidate translation and a list of reference translation. It's a number between 0 and 1, and the higher the score, the better the translation quality. And here I included two translations predicted by the models, where on the left side you see that's the actual tweet sentence, and on the right side you have the translations predicted by the model. And the red text highlights the difference between these two sentences, And as you can see, the translations are mostly correct. And yeah, and our glue score is 0.414. So it is higher than the state-of-the-art model, which has a blue score of 0.382. Despite the fact that we the model are doing pretty well, we're still finding ways to improve our models, such as collecting more data and try different types of models, and maybe fine-tune the model longer.
Thank you so much, Kevin.
Yeah.
That's a really detailed explanation of the modeling process. And I have a lot of questions, but I'll save them because I'm interested in hearing more about the technology behind this translation app. Again, with such a high fidelity, I mean, that's so remarkably better than the Helsinki version. We've got to know how this works. So, Leah, would you tell us a little bit about the data processing approach to the translation app?
Yes. It's like they said, we did not use the data that was readily available that's usually used. It's they called it the JW-300, and it's basically a translation of a workbook for Jehovah's Witness missionaries. And it's the most extensive existing corpus between these two languages, and the Bible translation. What we did instead is we had members of the team search the internet, and they were able to find many pairs for us to work with. We did use some existing corpuses that we found, or corpi that we found, but they had to be cleaned because they would be in rather than Asante Twi, and Aquapum Twi. So there would be tweaks to the translation that needed to be done. We also were able to gather some of our health data the same way, internet searches, and in our partners, our nonprofit partners contributed to that. And we also had local researchers on the ground in Ghana collecting data from textbooks and stuff like that, so that textbooks and internet searches there, that then they would provide the English translation for us. So we went at it from several different ways. And what we have accomplished at this point is, like Kevin said, 62,000 plus rows of English and Twi matching sentences that have been verified on both ends. And then the HealthBot data, the health chatbot data has been mainly what the team I worked on this past fall. And that—
Hey, Leah, can I pause you for a second? Just because I think one, this is a really unique approach, right? You're including several different kinds of databases and creating your own database from different corpus or corpi. And so in language translation, what is a typical like a data set of pairs in terms of the table you described? Like, let's say for tree language, it's spoken by, let's say, 100 million people worldwide, probably, including all the Ghanaians in diaspora. So what's called a low resource language, or a language that is, it's not as popular as Arabic or English or French, right? Which I could imagine those rows are in the millions. But something that's more local, but specific to a region, like a particular dialect, such as this. What's a comparable translation number in pairs? Do you know
I
offhand?
don't know if I could answer that question.
Okay.
We've just kind of built this. Sharif, do you have an idea of what other languages around this size, their data? I know ours is still growing. I know that we're still gathering and vetting and cleaning, and we have teams doing that now. So that's just going to continue to grow. But it's like, you couldn't really compare it to anything else because no one else has done this except based on, like we said, the existing corpus, which is religious based and kind of really messy with a lot of extra punctuation that doesn't, and references to words that no one uses. So, except in a religious context, which that's not what our use is.
Right, you're building a more contemporary, secular, certainly secular corpus.
Yes, and I just want to go a little bit into the chatbot data. This has been a very interesting experience because there's different ways to train a chatbot to respond to things. We originally started with a predictive text model, and that's where we have verified information with the links to where it comes from, and just like a paragraph or a few sentences and a topic. And so, but we didn't find that the bot was answering in a really cohesive way. It would leave things unfinished and didn't know where to stop, combined things. So we switched the type of model that we're using for the health chatbot to a question answer model. And so on the data side of that meant we went back into those paragraphs and collections of sentences that were explaining things about, menopause or something else related. And then we thought of questions that they would answer and duplicated those out. So the data team, I think it's more than just verifying that it's translated right or spelled right, or where do we find it? It's also a level of thinking, well, what kind of questions could this answer? And giving the bot as many different angles to come from as possible, I think is what's getting our high performance of being able to answer the questions. And then the one bot translates the question from Twee, feeds it to the other bot answers the question in English, and then the first bot translates it back to Twee. It's a really, really fascinating process. So it's fun to be working on this team. But I think that's all I have about that, unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Leah. So we started this off the title leveraging African philosophy, Ubuntu, and many of you might have heard of Ubuntu as a processing language, as an operating system. But Sharif's going to explain the importance of Ubuntu as a cultural and philosophical disposition.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you all for ushering us into this part of the discussion. My goal for the next 5 minutes is really to tell you about Ubuntu. And I'll be the first to admit that 5 minutes is definitely not enough time to dig into everything about Ubuntu, but let's see what we can do. So as Professor Royston mentioned, from really my experience, a lot of people associate the word Ubuntu with the Linux operating system, which is fine and will be apparent why they chose to name their free and open source operating system after this African philosophy. Before I really dive into all the details, I would like to tell you a very, very, very short story about the early encounter between Africans and Europeans. So when Africans first encountered Europeans, the Europeans asked, "Who are you?" And the Africans answered, "We are Bantu." So the Europeans were like, "Oh, so you are the Bantu people." Now, I know that may seem like the simplest version of a story you can ever hear. However, this story is anything but simple. There is a lot to unpack in this brief encounter. But before I even dive into try to unpack these, I would like to take a slight detour. But so please carry this story in your mind, this encounter in your mind as we proceed through this process. So at this point, you might be wondering really what Ubuntu even means. In very, very simple terms, the ideology of Ubuntu can simply be described as, I am because we are. I'll repeat that again. In very simple basis, Ubuntu is, I am because we are, or I am who I am because of who we all are. Different ways to say the same thing. So this is what you can think of as I am a person, or you are a person because of who we all are as persons collectively. I really want you to notice that there is no sense of individuality in this description I've mentioned. Everything I've said so far has no mention of the self or me in some cases, in most cases. So this generic overview of Ubuntu definitely works for so many cases and different contexts. But we as AI for Africa, we are anything but generic. So let's dive into more detailed versions of it. So Ubuntu as a philosophy in its original context is part of a much longer phrase, which in the Xhosa language is Umuntu, Ngumuntu, Ngabantu. I'll say that one more time. So Umuntu, Ngumuntu, Ngabantu. And this directly translates into a person is a person unto persons. I'll say that too one more time. So a person is a person unto persons. So to put it very simply, the word Ubuntu and from its original roots, it's really offering us a way to view what it means to be human. That is what Ubuntu tries to do. Really, what does it mean to be human? Unlike its more generic counterparts, which is I am because we are, this more nuanced definition of Ubuntu can be thought of as the affirmation of positive values of community, the affirmation of positive values of difference, of anti-racism, of hospitality, and of openness to other people. So Ubuntu is about really selflessness. It's about putting humanity first. It's about looking at issues from different perspectives. It's about removing oneself and one's view of individuality when approaching the world. And this is something the people who work on the AI for Africa team are too familiar with, that we, everything we do revolves around trust. These are the teachings of Ubuntu. So in Ubuntu, there is no other. There is no other race. There is no other gender. There is no other religion. There is no other class. There is no other creed. You know, all there is people. That's all there is when you look at humanity through an Ubuntu lens. So Ubuntu really forces us to challenge the fundamental definition of what it means to be a human. It teaches us that only when we start rethinking what it means to be a human and what our roles are as global citizens can we truly start to build more responsible, equitable, and accessible technologies like AI, policies, and social structures as a whole. So that's really what Ubuntu tries to tell us and hammer into our heads, if I may. So as I promised at the beginning of this presentation, I'm going to return back to the early encounter of Africans and Europeans and why it's really significant to our conversation or the conversations we're going to be having after our short talks. So remember when they asked the Africans, who are you? And the Africans beautifully responded, we are Bantu. And the Europeans tagged them the Bantu people, which is still something that holds to this day. You can look up the Bantu people. So the word Bantu actually means people. So what the Africans really told, or the answer they gave to the Europeans when they asked, who are you? Was that we are people. So it's pretty much saying, like, just like you are people, we are people. So it was quite ironic that because of the modernistic view of grouping people into others, into other people, other groups, other races, whatever, that we've all become really familiar with these days. They labeled these people, as Bantu people, which essentially means, if you think about it, the Bantu people are people. So at this point, I would like to bring my section of this talk to an end. And as I mentioned, 5 minutes, it's definitely no time to really dig into Ubuntu. I hope we are able to really think and share more in the following discussion, keeping in mind that Ubuntu is not just an African ideology, but an African ideology for the world that tries to redefine what we've come to know as humanity. Professor Royston, back to you.
Thank you, Sharif. Thank you for the exploration of Ubuntu philosophy. I put some more, let's say, links to the broader philosophy and application of Ubuntu to the our broader organization outside of UW-Madison called AI for Africa. And Jose Cosas, a scholar, educator, and technology theorist who has thought deeply about how to apply the principles of Ubuntu to machine learning and data science and artificial intelligence experiences. But I guess in the context of this Bazaar around data, community, protecting, as you said, trusting people's data, what I'd like to hear from the team is, how do you approach these values? How does Ubuntu drive the values of openness, community, connection, and, let's say, data privacy, or thinking about more open and socially, I guess, conscious or socially impactful approaches to machine learning? How does Ubuntu drive your applications?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Well, my name is
Yes, we can hear you.
Natalia. Thank you. My name is Natalia, and I'm part of the data team. And what I take from Ubuntu is the way it teaches us about the value of community and the power that resides in collective action. So through my work in AI for Africa, I seek to construct resilient partnerships, not only with my teammates and the people I work with, but with the communities directly impacted by our actions. I hope to contribute to this team that strengthens the fundamental pillars of families and the collective spirit of society at large. Thank you.
Natalie, can we just explore, Natalia, can we explore this a little bit more? So, Christine started the presentation talking about how we have taboos, not just in Africa, not just in the so-called developing economies, but, across the world, especially around women's health, sexual health. How is this part of the reason? I guess I'm curious, is this part of the reason why you chose this problem to tackle through a chatbot, so that there could be some privacy, and also just thinking in general about the focus on women's health? How is that reflective of kind of Ubuntu values?
Perfect. Of course. Well, I'm gonna go a little bit more personal, speaking from where I come from and why I decided to join Sharif and others in this beautiful team. I'm from Colombia, so I'm from Latin America. And for the longest time, I thought of doing projects and research only in Colombia. But precisely what the philosophy of Ubuntu tells us is that we're a single world. We are people, no matter where we come from, what cultures we have, what religions we have, beliefs. So a girl in Ghana or a girl in Ethiopia is just the same as me. And we have different backgrounds, we have different experiences, but that doesn't mean that we can't help each other, that we can't share information with each other. So a great part, or something that I've loved about working in the data team, is that we have tackled not only the biological reasonings or the biological aspects of menstruation and menstrual health, but we have also tackled those social associations and those social implications of menstrual health that are so important and that then can be like certainly taboo in some regions. So we want to tackle those barriers. We want to reach out to these girls and tell them that it's okay. We've been there. I have been there, and we can build a community together.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's really motivating. I'm impressed again with the vision here, that it's not just for Ghana, but Ghana is kind of a place where we can begin. That has, Ghana's official language is English, right? Or the language of business in Ghana is English. But as a, let's say less resourced language, how can we extend these data resources? And I'm really intrigued that thinking about respecting the cultural taboos and the mores and the morals that people are expected to go through, either through like puberty communities and whatnot, that some of this needs to be augmented or can be augmented through applications such as the chatbot itself. And again, we're seeing with the chatbot a way to, I assume that we can scale this at a level that we couldn't if we had a team of volunteers, right? I mean, that seems obvious. What are some other ways and what are some areas of health, let's say impact, that let's say this chatbot can assist with? Or what are some other projects that the AI for Africa team is using data for to address issues kind of in the developing economies of the world? That question goes for the whole team.
I think I can talk a little bit about this. I'm on the data team and I began with AI for Africa just this fall. And working with the team, we were able to, I think, collect close to 1,500 rows of data so far for the menstrual health aspect of that. And now that we have that, I think we're asking ourselves, like, what sector or field can we go into next with the data, and like, how will we collect that data? So just this past week, Sharif and I started thinking about, like, how can we use the technologies that we have worked on to go into fields like mental health. I know we've talked about beyond just like the data aspect, like thinking about like exercise resources, meditation resources, stuff like that, that can just like help people all together. And so right now, I think mental health would be the next thing after menstrual health that the data team would start working on.
Thanks, and and I'm thinking, hold on for a second, because I know so much about this project already. How do people? But if you could explain for other people, how do young women, how did the target community interact with the beta version of the chatbot? Are they downloading it on their phones? Is it over a browser? How does it work? How we've seen the science behind it. How does it work from a user standpoint?
Yeah, so actually just this past week, we started the testing. So we have people from the Care Ethiopia team running our first trials. And I can actually share my screen really quickly and show a little bit about what they're working with. So this right here is kind of like the beta test site that you would use, and you would type in a message, click send, and then you would get your response. So right now with the testing, we're having people, run questions, let us know if it worked, if it didn't work, what questions they think are missing, if any questions are getting answered in wrong way, just everything to do with our data. And then we're going to run more of these trials, fix the data, and just keep going and hopefully optimize our data set.
Wonderful. And where's the health information being pulled from?
So that was kind of going back to what Leah was talking about, this past fall, we spent a lot of time collecting, resources from the internet, talking with groups like Care Ethiopia and Days for Girls to get their resources that they have. So very wide breadth of resources, but we have everything linked to make sure that the data is very accurate. And then we've also had Care Ethiopia go through our data set and give us tweaks, any fixes, and this beta testing will also be working to verify everything and make sure that all the answers are exactly accurate.
Yeah, so this is already, so we've already expanded beyond Ghana. You're into Ethiopia as well, which is the language of business is English there. And English is widely spoken in Ethiopia, which is on the east coast of the Horn of Africa. So that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Sorry, I see a hand up by one show.
Yeah, I have a
One,
question.
so please,
Yeah.
yes.
Oh, so my question is like, so like, as I was looking through this, like, I mean, I guess like this chatbot thing is kind of like, like, for example, like, if you're like having like some customer service at Amazon, like, like you that, I mean, sometimes they'll just like do it in person, whereas like, you can just like select like, I'm stuck on this, and they'll just tell you like the next steps. But like, what I'm saying is like, I guess chatbot works the same way, but like, I mean, what's the benefit of our chatbot versus like people just surfing on the internet? I just don't know. I guess I guess I have lack of information about like how that thing looks like right now. But like what I'm saying is like, if we just like, get the data like just like stored in like the chatbot, I mean like people can just like go to Google and like search it. I don't understand like the benefit of like our chatbot versus like just like surfing on the internet. I guess like the mobile app is like it like we actually have some benefits to like over just like surfing on the internet, but I don't like so far. I guess it could be my lack of understanding, but I don't see the benefit of doing it versus surfing on on the internet. So yeah, I don't know.
I see.
That's a
Please.
sure.
Please.
That's a good question, Wansu, and definitely I appreciate you coming at this with such a healthy dose of criticism. So if you've been on the internet in the past couple of years, you know that there is a ton of information that you can just pull out of it. But there are so many questions that come with respect to credibility. One, reliability comes in too. You also are dealing with different contexts here that if you are working or if you look up data, so for example, what happens when I get harassed, then probably your response would be, hey, call 911. But to a girl in Ethiopia, 911 means nothing. That's one thing. The other part of this is also is that we do not work with these chatbots in isolation, right? The vision we are building with, especially these community partners, and the whole vision for the integrated app we are also building is that think of it like machines and humans working next to each other. It's not one replacing the other per se, that you have these experts who've been working their whole lives dedicated to helping these rural girls get access to these information, right? So what we're doing is how do we bring these experts into a space where computer assisted technologies are also in that space, working hand in hand to kind of provide these reliable information. The other aspect of it also that you can look at is that we are trying to build these tools in a way that they can work in regions with no internet. That how can I interact with this chatbot even when I don't have internet? How can I ask myself, what should I do when these boys are harassing me over menstrual health because I had my period if I don't have internet? And I cannot talk to my mom about it because these are taboo issues. And the people who would be coming to the village where I can talk to are not coming because of COVID, for example. All these serve as reasons why these technologies are relevant and long overdue, I would even add.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Like I mean, because like in the US, it's kind of like unless you go to like I don't know, like unless you live in the like mountains or something. Like I mean, like it's like internet is like accessible everywhere, but like in Africa, like there could be some places where internet is not accessible, and like, but if you have like some kind of chatbot, like yeah, you don't need to use internet, and just, yeah, we can just get the information from there. So yeah, that makes sense to me.
Natalia, sorry, I'm just reading, I'm not thinking in my head. Did you wanted to say something about this as well?
Yes, thank you. And don't worry, you're fine. Yeah, something that I learned in this previous weeks, I've been working with the data team too, is that speaking of internet, it sometimes is not as reliable as Sharif had mentioned. And for instance, it can give you various different kinds of answers. So if you go in the internet and you say, why is my stomach hurting? It's going to give you some obvious answers, but it can also tell you, oh, you maybe have a tumor. And that's not true. So the internet can be tricky sometimes. And that's why we have to be very careful with the data that we're working with. And a different side of this is also building off what Sharif just said. Menstruation is such an intimate thing that sometimes girls, when it's their first encounter with this kinds of things, um, you need that human contact. You don't need a Google answer. You need someone that's there to support you, that understands and that has that experience that will give you the different answer and that will give you a more comforting answer. And that's why we are working with this data, and that's why we don't always put the data straight from Google into the Google sheet that we have. We modify it so that it's relatable, and so that it's it's important to the communities that we're directly working with. And that's something that Google also fails at, and that it can sometimes have bias. For instance, we did a small trial a couple of weeks ago or 1 week ago, I don't remember. But we were asking, can I go to school when I'm on my period? That is a question that someone in America or in the United States wouldn't ask, because it's obvious for us girls in this side that we can go to school even though we have our period. It's not the end of the world. But for girls from a different context, that might not be as clear. So that's why it's important that we're here and that we try to eliminate this bias, and that we, again, using the Ubuntu philosophy, we try to have a more humane and integrating perspective in our answers.
Yeah, and I think, we don't want to also, from my perspective as a researcher of ICT, internet connectivity, connectivity comes and goes. Yes, we can look at our backbone in a particular country and a region and say it works really well here, but in some places in the United States it doesn't work so well, right? Not just rural areas, but urban cores. Think about a teenager at a middle school, like my daughter, for instance, in Madison. There's internet blocks, right? So you just can't go onto any website. And then we got to think about the social pressures too, about friends sharing information or looking at phones and thinking about that. I think the case here can be made for why discretion and intimacy, have to be baked into somebody's kind of learning through these phases of their life, through puberty and women's health. And we could think about other ways that health interactions need to be discrete, right? Mental health, and there may not be the same protections around if you got sick, for instance. And so I think I'm really excited by the approach here to have something that is geared towards discretion and also has the ability for translation in a local language, right? There won't be tons of information on a Shanti tree health information online. You can Google it, and you can't. Google Translate won't work. There's no engine right now for Akan languages, I believe, outside of search. So I have a question here, and then Sharif also had another point that he wanted to bring up. Leah, sorry, would you go ahead? You have your hand raised.
I think we had some other team members who had been prepared to answer the first question about how Ubuntu is, how they embody that and use it. And I think before we went fully into the big open discussion, I wanted to make sure we got a chance to hear from Faith and Whitney and, oh no, wait a minute. That's the wrong list. Sadiq and Christine and Whitney, I think, are the others that have prepared to kind of segue us before. And I think Anne had a separate answer with that too.
Yeah, I can kick this off. I mean, as I was talking before, working with groups like Care Ethiopia and Days for Girls, in my mind, the way we've used Ubuntu is we're all working together to solve this issue. And like, while we have a lot of differences, as Natalia said, we all are women working together to work on this issue. And, when we're working on it, we like drop all our differences and learn about each other's backgrounds, just to solve this commonality that we all have, and solve it with compassion and humanity, or look at humanity as, we're at the core, we're all the same. And I think sometimes, working with the data, I get caught up in just looking at the rows and forget to look at the bigger picture of what it is. And then I talk with girls on the ground in Ghana or Ethiopia and see, what the differences could make in their lives. And I think that really just embodies Ubuntu.
Beautiful. We had some other members who had some comments as well. And I see a question for Whitney.
It's not a question so much as just describing my role in the project. And I'm happy that we've to defer to the core members who are really, really integral to all of the technical and data collection pieces. My role is very different. I have more of a mentoring type role. I used to be the assistant director for the Data Science Institute, and now I'm a scientist studying team science. My core value is basically about building capacity in people. And that's part of why I ended up moving into teaching teams to be their best selves. And I feel like ultimately at the core, that's what Ubuntu is about. It's about seeing everybody as people and building capacity in people so you can build capacity in your community. So it's so exciting. This project is so exciting to me just because it sits so well into my core values that even when I changed positions, it was so important to me to stay part of it, even if I'm sort of on the side and not part of the core team doing all of the really hard technical work. So I just thought I'd share that and move on and let some of the other team members share as well.
Hey, so I'm Christine again, and I would just love to say that I'm from Kenya, so that's Africa too. But yeah, growing up, even though I didn't hear Ubuntu, I could still feel a sense of community in where I come from. And it was easier for me to carry that to AI for Africa because even getting here, even though I do not have a lot of professional experience, I'm glad that the team welcomed me. And when I have any questions, even hearing all this AI and computer science stuff that maybe sometimes I do not understand, it's just the community that they make it so easier for me to kind of understand what we are doing. And for me, that has been Ubuntu for me.
Thank you, Christine. What's your major, and how did you join the group here?
My major, I am not sure. I'm still a freshman, so I'm still exploring, but I'm thinking about economics and math.
Wonderful, great. And how did you join the team? How did you hear about the project and join the team?
I know Sherry from our scholarship program, but then one day I was just talking to him about my love for economics and business, and then he just, I don't know, liked what I do, and so I got here. So I don't know really that much.
Wonderful. And we have Sadiq who wants to talk about the project as well. And then after that, I think Sharif's going to do a little bit of demo of the tree translation.
Okay, so I think my notion, my notion of Ubuntu is on like a little bit personal level because Sharif and I have known each other almost our whole life, and I remember when he was a baby. And we before we even knew the technicalities of Ubuntu, we kind of applied it in our life, in our lives, and the society we came from. Because although we all we were all taught that yes, we are all born individual, and we all one day is going to die individuality, but our actions and inactions, our decisions and everything is going to affect the people around us and our society. So Sharif and I, decide use these notions our whole life. So I remember when he first came to me about this idea of creating machine learning a project for Africa and everything. I didn't really know the project and had little knowledge about IT and other stuff, and I can say I didn't believe in the project, but I believed in Sharif, and because of that, he's my brother from another mother. So I personally try to live with the notion of Ubuntu because I see Sharif as myself, and he also sees himself as me, and it applies to the people around me in my community and like people themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Ubuntu is more than just a South African or Xhosa philosophy, more than Ghanaian or African. It's truly Pan-African and global in scope. Sharif, there was some discussion about showing some of the prototypes, the tree prototypes, or are we ready to do that today? Or
Yeah, that's fine. I'm happy to briefly show how our translation does. I'm not sure how people are going to assess the accuracy, but I guess just trust me on this. It's good. Okay, so the same place that Anne showcased that chatbot, we have both of our models hosted at a similar place. So I wish I could share these links with people to start playing with them, but we are a very small project. We do not have a lot of funds, and most of these things are hosted on free sites. So we have limited quotas for what we can do with them each month. And because we are still in testing phase, we would rather not give people access except the people who are actually testing them. So also to say, this is the web version of probably what the translation is going to look like. So right before you called my name, I tried to put in, hello, I'm John. And in Chi, it says Mini John. And again, you have to trust me that this is the right way to translate I am John. A more slightly longer version is this text that you can throw in here. It's just a dummy, pretty much, dummy text. And if we hit translate also, we have this long sequence that comes out. So our models definitely have improvement. As we mentioned, we definitely have to improve in some sense. And I intentionally included this example because of its imperfection. So if you are looking at this critically, the last word on the translation is Wakanda. And Wakanda isn't the last word from the original version, but it's pretty much done 98% of the work. So these are some of the things that we have to improve, and we are actively working every day. We're trying to collaborate with more people on the ground, trying to create some internship programs where we can have students both in Ghana and the US contribute in collecting and building collecting the data that we can use to train. So this is a very brief demo of what our translation also looks like. Again, we have some few tweaks to do and improvements to do, and that's what we are into currently. The next phase for us in terms of the translation and the whole NLP with respect to African languages is to move into the speech to text space. Because if you think about it, it's one task to be able to translate an English sentence into a Cree sentence and vice versa. But we are trying to make our technologies, again, with the backend of Ubuntu, more accessible and into the hands of people who would otherwise not be able to interact with these technologies. So just imagine someone who does not have any formal education, so is unable to type in these sentences to even get translated. But the person obviously can, well, mostly can speak, right? So we are hoping to be able to do speech to text and speech to speech translations as our next steps. These are going to be really challenging for us. We are still learning and building every day. And as the project continues, we hope to maybe someday assemble you all again and show you how the speech to text models are doing also.
Sharif, as I was looking at that, of course, I speak a little Mika, Kakraka, tree, but there are letters, there are glyphs that are different as well, and I just wanted to point that out to the people who haven't seen it. And you know that yes, so part of the problem is here is that we've got different letters, you know, we've got different, you know, it's not a, you know, it's not a simple Arabic translation or Arabic, not Arabic, but the alphabet, English alphabet being used here. There's other characters and whatnot that have to be accounted for again. So how do you account for, you know, the kind of mixed usage, right? So a lot of people, you can think about text messaging, right? You know, so a lot of times the backwards E is what I'll call it. You know, people use the 3 for that. That's a S sound in tree. You know, but so instead of using that exact character that you can find on your computer or program into your phone, you know, people use mixed characters. How are you dealing with those kinds of shorthands in the chatbot itself?
Oh, that's a great question, and also probably to give a very good answer. I'll show some of the characters that you're kind of pointing out to, so that people can see exactly what you mean. Like these are. I'll zoom in here. These are like backward 3s. These are like backward Cs. There are a couple of characters that are not what you see in the English characters. And as Professor Royston just pointed out, someone, if I was chatting with my friends like Sadiq here, and if my keyboard is unable to kind of recognize this character, I cannot even type this on my keyboard. So, well, there are some keyboards that now allow you, but for the most part, people cannot. So people put a three in place of this to kind of get around this. And this is what Professor Royston is asking. What we've been doing a lot is before we feed any data into the models to train or to learn from, what we do is we do a ton of pre-processing. And I think this is something Leah alluded to a little earlier. So we pick these models, we know some characters are gonna be ruined. So we automate some scripts and we actually do some manual verifications to catch all these cases to make sure that if someone puts in a 3 instead of an A, that's what it stands for, then we're able to automate and change all these before we pass it to the model. So whatever the model receives in the end is the right version, and we expect that the users are not going to always put in the right version, but we account for those as part of the pre-processing step.
Thank you. Very fascinating.
And this slightly interesting addition to what you said, and again, Leah mentioned this briefly, is that even though chi is like a can is the broader category, it has so many different aspects to it that there are different versions of the same language. And imagine us collecting all this data, and inevitably we have, Leah, do you want to take this one?
I would say I think I know where you're going with it. I would say there are 4 main dialects used in Ghana, and the 2 that we worked with the most were Asante Twi and Akwapum Twi, and there are 2 others. But there was a lot of work that had to be done by our organic researchers and our Ghanan team, like Sadiq. He put in so many hours this summer going through and tweaking to make the output that we're giving is Asante. It's pure Asante Twi, which I believe Ruki has explained is the most historical, the most pure language. It represents the, you know, the what is most identified as the home language. And so we've really looked to bigger picture. As far as languages, there are 2,000 languages in Africa that are spoken by, you know, smaller groups of a few million here, a few million there, and only 3% of them are digitized, you know, preserved by being digitized and being able to be integrated, you know, into conversations. And I think we see the bigger picture in the end as we continue to grow and add more languages, that they're able to actually, Africans talk to each other within their own languages, you know, from one to the other. There's so many ways that this can be beneficial to humanity as a whole, and Africans, where we're focusing our goals right now. Anyway, I think that's what you wanted to go with. I may have gone a little further, but yeah, I think that answers the question.
And you know, I have a bias because I do research in Ghana, but you know, there's a lot of research, a lot of scientific exchange, research exchange, cultural exchange, engineering and commercial exchange in Ghana. So it, you know, as a test case for integration of a local language, which really, when you're in Ghana, it is Ashanti Tree. It is not, you know, most people can speak English, let's say in the city center, but as soon as you get just a little bit out, you know, Ashanti Tree becomes the lingua franca.
And I think I want to add about Aquapem, which is the one that is mostly built on before we came along. That was the dialect that was chosen and pushed by the colonizers that came to Ghana. And so, and most of the corpus, all of the corpi that were available, except a couple small ones, were from a colonization standpoint, not about a preservation standpoint from which we're coming.
We have a question here from Sarah Hagen. Do you have any examples of decisions made by your project team that have been based on Ubuntu? Where a team with a more, let's say, individualistic value system might have made a different choice. So,
yeah, I just listed down 4 quick things that just came off the top of my head. So the first one is the mobile app itself. So our front-end team and the team as a whole, we spend a lot of time building this mobile app. And we were complete with our minimum viable product. It was complete and end-to-end working without bugs and everything. But then we as a team again sat down to really assess what our app is doing. So just a little bit of background, the complete app, just imagine having Instagram, but having more robust technologies to it in some sense, that it allows you to make direct communications, one-on-one chat with people. It had the function for you to post images and just videos, and just like you would have on Instagram. And of course, it had all the machine translation, the chatbot, we had period trackers, and all those technologies back in it. But we sat down and we thought, well, if we are saying that we want to build a more responsible technology than what is already in existence, if we look at what we had at the moment, it would have reinforced some of these things that we were trying to solve. That if people were still being allowed to just freely post images of themselves, and people can spend hours and hours just scrolling through, and the target audience, which are these girls, who in most cases are vulnerable, are going to be exposed to these things, just imagine the implications it's going to have on their mental health, their self-image. So all this is to say, we decided, no, we need to rebuild this. So since we made that decision, we spent months trying to rip out what we already built and rebuild something new. We're trying to rebuild a component that allows for group interactions, that allows for humanness in that space. where you're able to have conversations with experts in the room to help guide these communications. That's one thing I just came to my mind. The other aspect was also working with on-ground folks. We could have, as I think Anne also alluded to this earlier, that we could have decided to just pull data from the internet, plug it into our chatbot without working with one on-the-ground people or spending too much time on verification. But for every single line that we feed into our chatbot or translation, someone, or at least a couple of people, have looked at those lines to say, yes, this is good. This is something we should have in our app. We could have bypassed that. We could have just plugged in data and fed our model and it'll perform just fine. And this is even to say, one thing I like about our model, and this is something that Ethiopia told us once they started the initial testing, that of course the model needs improvements. If you say, if you ask it a question like, am I pregnant? It still has challenges, and we are working on that currently with the data team. But it's not going to give you an answer, which is going to be like, maybe it's an extreme case, but go hurt yourself or go do something. It never happened. This is because of the careful nature of the data that we are feeding to it. The next one that I also want to add quickly is who we are working with. Christine mentioned that she was a freshman, and we are like, we could be like, no, we don't want people who we have to train. We don't want people who we have to spend time teaching these technologies. We could just look for people who are juniors and seniors with the expertise and just get them hit the ground running. But we have so many, our team consists, I think the majority of our team are freshmen and sophomores who are building their skills, learning about themselves, learning about the project, and also making meaningful contributions. A team which wasn't thinking in the sense of Ubuntu could have done something different. The final thing that came to my mind, and I'm sure the team has a lot to add, is just the way of monetizing the app itself, right? The app needs to find a way to sustain itself. We could have said, okay, we would sell ads. We could have said we would sell the user data. We could have said we would put in some options for people to buy and sell in the app, but we've done none of those. And we've consciously made that decision. It's not something we could not do. It's something we've consciously chosen not to do. So these are a few instances where I can think of a group that weren't working on Ubuntu Sense could have made completely different decisions, and that would be completely valid, but we chose not to.
Anyone else have any takes on the question? How's this design process? Thank you, Sharif. That was really fantastic. I do think we're kind of up against time here, so I just would like to wrap up and say this has been a fantastic demo and discussion about not just how to do data science, how to build AI, or what our relationship with AI, but how to do it better, how to do it with community values, how to speak to people's needs on the ground rather than developers' interests in labs, right? And that's what we'd like for our impact, to build Ubuntu values directly into software design. And this team is instituting it as a kind of pedagogy and ideology within the team itself. I think it's really great. I'm happy to be a part of it and to witness most of it taking place. Let me just share just a few more slides before we go today.
Professor Royston, if
Sure.
I wouldn't mind chiming in before we go,
Please.
I'd like to say a few things.
Sure.
One is to really say thank you to the team. I think it's amazing. I'm so lucky to have every single one of you here on the team to help with this process. This wouldn't have been possible without you. And of course, there are people like Whitney here, like Steve, like Professor Royston, like all these advisors, Leah, the names can keep going on and on, but thank you all very much. I think this wouldn't be possible without you. The departments, Whitney was our segue into the Data Science Institute. We have the Data Science Institute, we have the Computer Science Department helping us. We have the Whiskers program helping us. We have the African Studies program helping us. And we are really, really grateful to all these people for making these things work, for believing in the project, believing in me and making these happen. My final thoughts just on the whole idea of Ubuntu in technology is that there's a lot of work to be done. Technology, we need to rethink about it. We need to rethink about humanity. And this is what Ubuntu offers us, that it's about who is building the technology, what are they thinking about, who is advising them, who is in their space, who are they thinking about. All these are really important questions that we have to start asking ourselves as we build and deploy technologies. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
I'd like to jump in really quickly here at the end and just remind everyone, we do have a website, in the chat. I know that Professor Royston posted it, the Sharif Isaac one for the AI for Africa group. That's how you can keep in touch with us. I know I got connected with this group through last year's Data Science Bazaar, and just coming to this interactive discussion and seeing some of their other presentations. And I was drawn to Sharif and his leadership style and his professionalism. And I'm honored to be, I'm sure all of us on the team, would want to be. We are grateful for Sharif as he is grateful for us, and we are open to new members. So please, if you're at all interested, contact us, see how you can explore or get involved. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, I just want to say thank you again. I've had a few slides up, and look in the chat for some links to the rest of the programming for Data and Communities, the 2022 Data Science Research Bazaar. Thank you, AI for Africa. Again, my name is Professor Reginald Royston, and you can find me, just Google me if you want to get in touch with me. And I also teach at University of Wisconsin-Madison as well. It's been a fantastic session. Good luck with the workshops the rest of the day and with the Research Bazaar's sessions coming up. Take care.